Reactive training systems.
I mean, that's one of the things that stands out to me immediately is that you see really talented lifters all show different kinds of technique. And there's all these different uh, ways for technique to show up, right? So, like, one of the classics, like some of the classics are going to be like things like stance width and grip width, you know. But even beyond that, like some people tend to really sit into their knees more. Other people sit back a lot more. Some people like are more hip dominant, and other people quad dominant. And um, you will see not as much. I don't think there's kind of as much diversity in something like the bench press. I think the bench press tends to be pretty similar bar paths, and like you see different grip widths, but the task itself is pretty constrained. And then with the deadlift, you see quite a lot of variation, maybe the most actually, once you account for things like changes in back position, stance, and like the difference between sumo and conventional is pretty notable as well. Um, yeah, like is that kind of how you it, does that weigh into how you view technique as well? Like, are you looking at what top athletes are doing? Does that factor into your framework?
Yes and no, because I think it's hard to have a really thorough discussion on technique without taking into account survivorship bias and noticing that, hey, all these, like, I watched a video a couple years ago, I think it was a David Wilson video, and he was describing lockout mechanics in a deadlift. And he was like, hey, some people will tell you need to do this and this and this. And at the same time, it's like, people will tell you need to do this and this and this. And you see these in all these top lifters. And you see these in all these like deadlift world record holders. And that just probably doesn't work for you. You have to kind of change based on how you are built, what your strengths, your weaknesses are. So I think there's definitely some big things in like all the lifts that attract people to certain things. And there's a reason why most people use the leg drive and most people, squat with, nobody's squatting like, unless you're like one of those multiply guys, nobody's squatting like completely out, super wide. So there's things that attract people to certain techniques, but I tend not to try to look at top lifters for that. I think it's a really good sample to grab from, because those are people who are excellent in their technique. And at the same time, I try to look at what people with quote unquote poor technique, what they're doing and how they're solving problems for their builds, their leverages. And at the same time, this is just me, I tend to be pretty technique agnostic. It's like, I don't really care about technique. Like, I care about technique because ultimately that's how you're moving. And at the same time, if you are lifting to a comp standard and you are getting something that will pass in a competition and you add 100 kilos to a lift, but you have quote unquote really inefficient and poor technique visually, according to what someone would determine, I'm fine with that. There are some people, I've heard this like all the time, people being like, oh, your coach didn't do blank technique thing. How could you ever, like, that's a bad coach. Like they didn't fix this technical problem. And I'm like, not that I think that I do that, but if someone were to tell me that for one of my athletes, then I'm like, hey, but I put 50 kilos on their squat. Like,
Yeah,
does it really matter? I don't know. So I tend to be pretty
yeah. I
agnostic
mean,
on
I'm
technique.
I'm with you to an extent, and I mean, I think it's interesting to kind of explore like what some of the limits of these things would be. You know, I don't like. I try not to nitpick technique very much because, like you say, it's like solving movement problems. And people are going to have different ways of doing that. And for the most part, I want them to use the strongest one, and I don't worry about it too much. But I do think, like, at its limit, we probably do know some things. Like the one of the things that stands out to me is if you have a technique that puts a high degree of stress or strain on a particular tissue, and then you maximize the program, like you maximize the volume throughput and you maximize the loading as far as you can push it. You can kind of guess which tissues are going to be the limiting factor, right? So going toward a technique that is pretty balanced across available tissues seems like a good idea. Now, that has to be balanced. Like the counterpoint to that is like, well, you have to lift the most weight, and, if doing some technique puts a lot of strain, like, okay, let's give a concrete example here. If somebody deadlifts with a round back technique, we can see mechanically that their spinal erectors are doing more work, and we can see that there's like a comparatively significant amount of force transfer that's going through the spinal segments, So if you maximize that person's program, like, yeah, that's probably the tissue that's most at risk. Now, we don't have to catastrophize that. We don't have to like freak out about back injuries and things like that. Like those are things that can happen, but so can injuries occur to other tissues as well. If you don't like the back injury example, maybe it's like a wider stance, squat being extra taxing on the adductors, or something along those lines. If you maximize that program, we can guess which tissues are going to probably, not definitely, but probably be the ones to suffer. Now, those tissues adapt and change and grow stronger. We know this, and that's good. Like that's a protective mechanism. There's just a limit to how far you can take that, and so that's not to say, like, there's all these caveats that we have to talk about because I brought up injuries, but that's fine. That's not to say that, like, if you squat with a wide stance, you're gonna injure your adductors tomorrow, but if you maximize that over a long period of time, you can see which tissues you're putting the most stress and strain through, and there's a limit to adaptation. So maybe that becomes a risk, maybe not. But the point I'm trying to make is, for me, like when it comes to deciding a technique, there's like this balance that needs to be struck between, okay, this is the technique that you're strongest with, and that's the sport, so do that, and then this is the technique that I think will probably lead to the best strength expression over the long term, so we don't always know that, and it's not a guarantee, but, if I had somebody who, we'll stay with the ultra wide squat example, would I try to see if a narrower stance can work for them? Yeah, I would. But if it doesn't, if it's a David Wilson situation or something like that, I'm not going to freak out about that. Like, we'll continue to work at whatever stance is producing the best platform results, and so, like, he ends up being a pretty good example of this, I think. Like, he's found the stance that works for him, and regardless of how it looks on paper, like how you may textbook the thing, it's the thing that makes him the strongest on the platform.
Yeah.
Hey, let me tell you something that I know about you. Your lifting is important to you. It's probably one of your biggest priorities. And for people like us, nothing compares to the feeling that you get when you set a new PR. That feeling of being the best that you've ever been, of doing something that you've never done before. This is what we're all after, and it's also what RTS specializes in. Getting you the absolute best program possible so that you can hit new PRs and reach your goals. We call it radically individualized training, and we're really good at it. Whether we need to account for busy schedules or equipment limitations, or precisely turn the dials and get the details of the program just right, we have the tools and the experience to guide your lifting to the next level. To us, coaching is all about leadership, relationship, and creative problem solving. A coach should be poised to help you make tough decisions about training and competing so that you can continually grow in your development. And of course, a coach should be a first-rate problem solver, especially when it comes to your training, technique, and strategy. Now, all this has to be built off of a really strong, professional coaching relationship that emphasizes trust and respect. Additionally, RTS coaches are not on an island. We have a strong network of professionals to reach out to, so if you find yourself in need of some specific expertise, say in the realm of nutrition or injury management or sports psychology, there's a deep expertise available there too. For more information, go to store.reactivetrainingsystems.com and click on coaching. That's store.reactivetrainingsystems.com, then click on coaching. Hope to see you on the team soon.